Welcome back to Hardball. What you have in Ferguson, Missouri is a dangerous mix of racial tension and police aggression combined with an unsteady and unpredictable flow of information. It's in this environment of uncertainty and chaos that we've seen many politicians avoid the hot-blooded issues of race and class that are at the center of this storm. Yesterday, President Obama addressed the situation by urging calm, peace and calm, a message that has been widely echoed by elected officials across both aisles. But here's where things get interesting, because one of the loudest voices in support of the black community and against the police is a Republican. The Republican Party has historically sided with police. They used to call it the party of law and order. They like to call themselves that. This is also a party that is 90% white and has consistently alienated large portions of the black community. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul wants to run this party. But yesterday, he delivered a blistering op-ed in Time magazine, which has caught the eye of every major newspaper across the country, because he didn't just wade into the racial issue, he dove head first, saying, "If I had been told to get out of the street as a teenager, there would have been a distinct possibility that I might have smarted off, but I wouldn't have expected to be shot. Given the racial disparities in our criminal justice system, it is impossible for African Americans not to feel like their government is particularly targeting them." So what exactly is going on here? Gene Robinson's a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist with the Washington Post. Nick Gillespie is the editor-in-chief of the libertarian website Reason.com. Well, that's a good question. What is going on here, Gene? I mean, we say it in the opening. You think of, the Republican Party, the party of Nixon, the party of law and order, the party of, the police are always right. What do you make of Rand Paul in this particular moment? We know he has libertarian tendencies, but in this particular moment, choosing to weigh in like this.
Well, I think he's being opportunistic, but I'm not using that in a pejorative sense. A politician who's not opportunistic doesn't get very far. And I think he identified an issue in which, and a moment in which his own views coincide with the views of many African Americans, many liberals, and he seized on that to highlight that. And he feels it's an opportunity, and he's taking it.
Well, so, Nick, within the Republican universe, sort of on the right, I'm curious how something like this goes over. Because as we say, it was always just the go-to sort of campaign device for Republicans was always to attack the Democrats as the criminal coddlers, the ones who don't respect the police enough. So this is the kind of thing they used to go after Democrats for. How is this being received on the right?
Well, it's interesting because Rand Paul is setting up a different constellation of concerns. He was basically the only guy in the Senate who was really kind of head out there on privacy issues, which really resonated with young voters, especially in a way that nobody was expecting. And it was to the shame of the Democrats that, with the exception of Rod and Wyden, none of them talked during his filibuster. And I think, what Rand Paul is, he's threading a different needle here. And most interestingly to me, on Twitter today, you saw a lot of conservatives, including people at groups like Hot Air and whatnot, who were responding to Rand Paul and to the militarization of police issue. I think a lot of conservatives are slipping into libertarian territory because they see the use of force and the overuse of force as kind of emblematic of what they dislike about government more and more.
Have you seen, I'm curious too, because I'm sure you've been watching Rand Paul. I mean, we've all been watching him closely. You've probably been watching him particularly closely. You're a libertarian publication there. Have you seen Rand Paul over the last year or two? We know he's embarked on this sort of national tour where he, one of these listening tours, talking to a lot of black audiences. There was the speech at Howard University we all remember from last year. There's been more than that, though. Have you seen specific changes in issues he's chosen to address, in positions he's taken over the last year or two that you could say are a result of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he's been emphasizing things like school choice and sentencing reform in a big way, and he's also talking about marijuana legalization, or rather marijuana prohibition at the federal level. He has explicitly said that the drug war is hurting minority communities more than other communities, and I think he's growing sensitivity to that, and he's also using it to talk about the way in which government power gets abused at all levels and then has disparate impacts.
Well, there are some people who are skeptical about this, and here's why some of them might be. During his campaign for the Senate back in 2010, Paul said he was against parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, including the key part of the law that forced private institutions like restaurants and hotels to serve blacks. Here's Paul during an interview with the Louisville Courier-Journal back then.
I like the Civil Rights Act in the sense that it ended discrimination in all public domains, and I'm all in favor of that.
But
You had to ask me the but. I don't like the idea of telling private business owners. I abhor racism. I think it's a bad business decision to ever exclude anybody from your restaurant. But at the same time, I do believe in private ownership.
Now, Gene, ask Rand Paul now about that comment then and what he's saying now, and he'll get offended at the idea there's any difference between who he was and what he was saying in 2010 and who he is and what he's saying now. But watching him, have you noticed any changes in Rand Paul the last couple of years?
Well, if you ask him about that particular quote, I think he'll say, it wasn't me. That was some other guy. That was my evil twin. He has pretty much flatly disowned that set of views about the Civil Rights Act, and I think he will stick to this revised position as he contemplates or launches his presidential bid. I mean, there's a calibration that's clearly going on, and he's going to face questions about changes and shifts in positions that once were more pure libertarian and now are shading into sort of what a lot of people would call real world territory.
Well, I think he's stressing the idea of the Republican Party if it's going forward. He told me in an interview I had with him in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, the Republican Party has to become the party of live and let live. That's a radically different message than the social conservatism that I think he believes in, but he recognizes that the governing strategy, you've got to kick things like drug legalization and gay rights down to the state level and get them out of Washington. And that's he's going to face a lot of criticism, mostly from the right on that, but I think it will make him seem more interesting to the massive independents.
Nick, I guess my question, Nick, is he getting into a bit of a danger zone here? There have been a lot of Republicans who've talked about, we want to move the party a little bit, but he's really trying to take some steps here. And
this is a guy who has taken on the military-industrial complex, he's not an isolationist, but he says, you know what, we shouldn't be bombing all of these countries. He stood up to Obama when Obama was going to start bombing Syria without congressional authorization, and he asked for, the president to ask for authorization for Libya. He is already, kind of neck deep in a lot of deep Republican currents, but it's exactly those things, because he's a true fiscal conservative, that I think he can really say this and change the party. And I think, if nothing else, I don't care if a Republican wins or a Democrat. I'm a small L libertarian, but I think he's going to make for a much more interesting political discourse about the role, the size, scope, and spending of government.
No, I think people are already looking forward to these debates in 2016. Put him up on the stage with Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, whatever. Let's see what happens. Anyway, but thank you to Gene Robinson, Nick Gillespie. Really appreciate that. And up next, the corruption trial of former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. Prosecution has made its case. Now it's the defense's turn. This is Hardball, Place for Politics.